I'll be your moderator, and I'll be joined by panelists Dr. Nida Chenagtsang and Dr. Pilar Jennings, as well as Dr. Joe Loizzo. We'll open today's panel with a keynote dialogue between Dr. Nida and Joe. Dr. Nida and Joe, feel free to enable your video as I introduce you with your bios. Dr. Nida Chenagtsang is a Tibetan physician and founder and medical director of the Sowa Rigpa Institute, School of Traditional Tibetan Medicine. In addition to his work as a physician, he trains students in Sowa Rigpa and the Deepening tradition in over 40 countries globally. Dr. Nida has published many articles and books on Sowa Rigpa and the Deepening tradition in both Tibetan and English. He has extensively researched ancient Tibetan healing methods and has gained high acclaim in both hemispheres for his revival of little-known traditional Tibetan external healing therapies. He completed his medical education at Lhasa Tibetan Medical University with practical training at the Tibetan medicine hospitals in Lhasa and Loka. Alongside his medical education, Dr. Nida trained in many schools of Vajrayana Buddhism and received complete teachings in the Deepening lineage, the unique spiritual tradition of Tibetan medicine from his teachers, Khenpo Tsochum Gyaltsen and Khenchen Troro Tsenam. Dr. Joe Loizzo is a psychiatrist, clinical researcher, and meditation scholar teacher who integrates neuroscience with contemplative practice to help people cultivate personal well-being, interpersonal compassion, and transformational leadership. Assistant professor at Weill Cornell Medical College and founder of the educational nonprofit Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science, he has published dozens of chapters and articles on the benefits and mechanisms of meditation in peer-reviewed publications, such as the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences and Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. His books include Boundless Leadership, Sustainable Happiness, and Advances in Contemplative Psychotherapy, and he offers classes and workshops internationally through Nalanda Institute and maintained a private practice in Manhattan. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to get the dialogue started, and I know folks are typing into the chat and typing questions. We'll do Q&A toward the end, and we'll have someone to help us kind of field those. So hold tight, and we look forward to being in dialogue with you in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheryl, for that introduction, and welcome, Genla, Dr. Nida. It's so nice to see you from Rome, and I'm in California right now, so we're sort of several time zones away. And it's great to continue our dialogue, which we've been engaged in for a number of years now, about the potential synergy and confluence between the Tantric Buddhist medicine and Western psychotherapy. So I'm just going to have some small introductory comments and then turn it over to you. So after a century of psychotherapy practice, which has been focused on talk therapy and essentially placed a taboo on embodied methods such as active practices of imagery, psychodrama, breathwork, posture, and movement, there's been several lines of research in recent decades that have raised interest and awareness about the importance of embodied approaches. Studies of the neuropsychology of stress and trauma showed how overwhelming threats often lead to a split between verbal consciousness and deeply embodied emotional memories and visceral reactions that, when we are triggered in the present, often then flood the mind and body with memories and visceral responses and reactivities. Trauma researchers like Judith Herman and Bessel van der Kolk in the 90s began to advocate for and explore creative arts and therapies, embodied approaches like yoga, breathwork, and movement that could directly connect with the embodied memories and reactivities that erupt in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This shift gradually has opened the door to a new family of therapies and changed the general awareness in the psychotherapy world. These therapies that are coming out, the newer embodied approaches, hark back to unconventional psychoanalytic approaches developed by Carl Jung and Wilhelm Reich. And they include, in our day, Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, Pat Ogden's sensory motor therapy, Richard Schwartz's internal family systems, Dana's polyvagal theory, and Resmaa Menacem's somatic abolitionist approach. While this radical turn towards embodied approaches to trauma has become increasingly mainstream in the last decades, it also relies heavily on contemplative methods like yoga and mindfulness. But neither the professional audience nor the general public are aware that the Buddhist tradition has its own highly sophisticated and time-tested approach to transforming embodied trauma into embodied awakening. So the Buddhist Tantras developed in India and preserved in Tibet involve a powerful embodied contemplative science and practice that's used not just to deepen and accelerate spiritual awakening, but also for psychosomatic healing and transformation of the human condition in general, especially our pandemic, individual and collective trauma, which has unfortunately been with us for millennia. While tantric practices have historically been shrouded in secrecy and poorly understood in both the East and the West, in recent decades, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has empowered a new generation of teachers, scholars, and doctors like Dr. Nida to shed light on this powerful embodied science and practice. My Western and Tibetan mentors, Robert Thurman and Gaelic Rinpoche, were among this recent generation and grounded me in an embodied transmission of this powerful healing lineage as well, along with my other Tibetan teachers, Ling Rinpoche, Serkon Rinpoche, and others. My life's work as a contemplative psychiatrist and psychotherapist has revolved around gradually weaving the science and practice of the Buddhist Tantras into embodied transformational therapies for individuals, couples, and groups. These are what we explore. These therapies we explore in our 3-year contemplative psychotherapy program at Nalanda Institute. So what does tantric science and medicine bring to the emerging new field of embodied therapies that's not there or that's not happening already? So I'm just going to touch on 5 points. I'm curious to see what Genla thinks of them, but these are sort of my 5 big takeaway contributions. First of all, it has a radical optimism. It's based on the recognition that we all have Buddha nature, that these tantric approaches depathologize our pervasive human suffering, including traumas, and affirm our innate potential to transform trauma into embodied individual and collective awakening. Again, you can tell us about PTSP when you speak. I'm sure everyone would love to hear that. Buddhist tantric views. So the second point is, in addition to being radically optimistic, Buddhist tantric medicine and psychiatry bring a view of the human mind, body, and life far more sophisticated than even the most far out current views of complexity theory, quantum neuroscience, and eco-psychology. They see the individual, society, and nature as all continuously co-emerging and co-creating each other through a subatomic field of transformational mind, energy, matter. This holistic science, therefore, supports a radical optimism about our potential to transform not just an individual embodied trauma, but also to sort of have that simultaneously be a transformation of our relationships, our institutions, and our systemic relationship in society and with nature. So that's number 2. It has this sort of incredible, very sophisticated, holistic view of life and reality. Now, more importantly, we have methodology. So today's newly minted somatic approaches focus on the gross physical body and the unregulated nervous system. Tantric approaches focus on the subtle and extremely subtle mind-energy body, which allows us to tap directly into core blissful flow states that unlock our full subatomic potential, or sort of extremely subtle potential for self-creation and self-transcendence. And that allows us to deepen and speed healing and awakening in at the embodied level. This approach is guided by the very sophisticated map of the subtle body, which is an internally felt map of what it is and can be like to live fully mindfully and artfully inside our embodied human mind. So that's the third, is this incredible approach to tapping into these, to our field of transformation at the core of our being. Fourth, Tantric approach offers one of humanity's most comprehensive and elegantly integrated multidimensional methods to accelerate healing and transformation. These include top-down practices, mind, mind speaking to heart and body, like imagery, recitation, as well as bottom-up methods like breathwork, self-massage, and energetic movement, where the body is speaking to the nervous system from the bottom up. And these allow us to prime transformation on many levels, right? From the mind, the breath energy body, and the physical body in a concerted way. Incredibly sophisticated. This approach isn't just an eclectic mishmash of many different techniques that like what's developing now, but it's a very systematic approach in which to completely transforming our way of being in a human body and nervous system that's guided by the subtle body map, and allows us to increasingly transform our own central nervous system, down to our metabolism and epigenetics. And finally, the Tantric approach is comprehensive in its engagement with the whole spectrum of lived embodied experience. So it doesn't just offer methods that work from the waking state, it offers methods that work from the whole range of mind-body states that we can possibly experience, including dreaming, deep sleep, sexual experience, near-death experience, and then what I consider the natural psychedelic states of blissful ecstasy and creativity. So those are the 5 points that I think Tantric science brings that just aren't really in the conversation of this very promising and exciting conversation about embodied approaches. So I'm really eager. I know, Dr. Nida, you and I have done some teaching together, and I've had so much fun hearing your views of Western psychotherapy. We come at this from opposite ends of history and the planet, perhaps. I want to turn it over to you and hear what your thoughts are about the Utah lineage and how it can really enrich this current move toward embodied approaches.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you have explained everything about Tantra. 5 points, which is great. Yeah, great. So yeah, you mentioned that 5 points. I think it's a great. And yeah, as you said, you know, I come from the other side of the planet, and the Himalaya high plateau. And so since more than 25 years, you know, I have been living in the West, and I'm kind of realizing, you know, we have a kind of different route, and especially about education, you know, because when we grew up, I was born in a yurt, a tent, and then, you know, in a nomadic family. We are always taught to trust in yourself and trust in other people. But here in the West, the education is don't trust anybody. You know, everybody can be dangerous and this and that. Don't trust no one, you know. So I think it's a really different kind of foundation. And then later, when we are trained in education, study, everything is transformable, everything is changeable, right? We don't hold things in a really solid, you know, like a matter, you know, like a piece of stone or piece of brick. And so what we are told is everything is changing, transformable, like from the milk to the cheese and to the butter and the buttermilk, right? So, you know, the milk is the yogurt. So the milk is the base, but then through the work, it can become cheese or buttermilk or yogurt or the butter, right? So actually, this is kind of our education. Nothing is kind of solid, you know, everything is kind of the form of energy, and everything is transformable. So here, I think in the West, the education is like very systematic, very mathematic, you know, and also very everything you have to see, you have to touch, you have to measure, you know. And so that's why the education is becoming, in a good way, it's very systematic, but in a other way also it's very solid, you know, right? Because we grow up this kind of education, I think that's the problem. We get stuck in the wrong views, you know. We can't trust in anybody. Then, okay, I can't trust in people. Then maybe I can't trust my family members. Maybe even I can trust my close friends, siblings or parents, you know. So I think that is kind of messing up a lot in this new society. And so for us, you know, we learned how to trust in others, and then that can actually help us to how to trust in ourselves. And then the second part is this, when things are not solid, so everything is transformable. As Buddha said, everything is changing. Everything is changing except the change. And actually, we understood this through our education. Yes, things work in a very calculated way, very systematic way, but things work also in a very random way. It's not necessary everything have to be logic. So I think, yeah, that is a kind of really different education or our foundation. And then because of our this kind of childhood education, the things, how we understand, how we are trained, I think then things very easy to understand Tantra, right? So for example, the great Tibetan scholar, Ginten Chumpel, the author of the Tibetan Art of Love, for example, he says, when you study Tantra, especially the creation stage, when you recreate yourself, he says the goal of recreating yourself is to break all logics down, right? Because we believe in logics, what is good, what is bad, and how you should behave, how you should think, and you have to be study well, you must be successful, and this and that. We are trained this way, and we kind of get stuck in this system, right? But then the tantric practice, especially the generation practice, is how to break all these logic ideas, logic thoughts, the walls. And actually we have to realize we are in the different boxes, right? The boxes of the family's rule, the boxes of the school, boxes of society, box of the culture, box of the tradition, and the national box, international box, and how to be a human, all the things. Everything is kind of theorized, everything is becoming theory, everything becoming a system. But at end, I think humans are becoming the victims of the system and this kind of theories, right? So that's why when we learn the tantric things, okay, you can transform yourself into a deity. So you can manifest as a peaceful deity, as a joyful deity, as a wrathful, very fearful, very angry deity. It's okay. So we can manifest that. We don't need to repress the anger. We don't need to repress the stress, right? Actually, the problem is, the pain is not the problem. Suffering is not the problem. So in that case, maybe in the tantric, I think we should talk about the view, So normally in the Buddhist, they talk about the right view. What is a right and correct view? So in that case, what is the correct view? We grew up in this type of education and this type of system. Actually, it's a very systematic brainwash, right? And then we all become kind of robotic and we lose our organic nature. But if we really embody our organic nature, so pain is part of the life and suffering is part of the life too. Drama is part of life. If there's no drama, maybe life is too boring, right? And the traumas are also part of our life and ourselves. So in this case, Tantra really says, normally we think, okay, pain and suffering, we have to eliminate it. We have to get rid of it. Or the anger, we have to repress it. We can't express anger and, it's harmful. And this, yes, it's harmful for others. It's harmful for ourselves too. Desire, attachment, addiction, and all the things, jealous, pride, they're all dangerous stuffs too, right? But I think the main question is not that those negative, destructive emotions are dangerous and negative, we should avoid them. Actually, we need to embody them. We need to understand them, our negative, destructive emotions, and then using themselves and will liberate them or liberate us, right? I think that's why it's a question of managing, it's a question how we manage the anger, how we manage depression, and how we manage anxiety, right? So in that case, I think the right view is very important. So because if we don't have a clear view about these things, if we think depression is something very bad and something very negative, and then if we are depressed, we get stuck there because every day we are thinking about that. Every night we think or we worry about this, so we are kind of stuck, or we sunk inside of the depression, and then we feel like hopeless, helpless, and we can't get out of it, right? So we see something very scary, something very negative, and we make ourselves get stuck there, right? So then it's like a bad relationship, we have a very bad friend and we don't know what to do with this friend, right? So actually, if we are guided in a different view, it's okay, to be depressed. It's okay to have anxiety. This is organic human emotion too, nature too. Okay, then let's see in a different way, right? Let's see in a different way. Recently, I said something. I said, if we sees the nature of the darkness, darkness is the most powerful light, right? But in general way we are thinking is, we think that, darkness is the scary thing, we don't want it, and then we get stuck there. So that's why I think this right view is very important. And once we have this really powerful right view is becoming the foundation of the right thought. And then the right thinking is becoming base of right action. So then we have to take action. How to take action, and mostly is empowering ourselves. That's why in Tantra, empowerment is very important, right? So, but once we are able to take that action to transforming, to changing ourselves, and then of course we can also help others. So yeah, that's why in the Tantra we talk about this creation stage and completion stage. And many people, they say, oh, we are confused about tantric images and deities, this and that. I said, that is actually the beauty part of Tantra, because it's not logic. It shows us another side of the world and another side of the reality.
Thank you. This is a juicy start. This is a good start. We're going to continue. Thank you both, Dr. Nida. Thank you, Joe. I want to invite Pilar into this conversation. Dr. Pilar Jennings, feel free to start your video. And I'll introduce Pilar, who is a psychoanalyst. I'm waiting for, there you are. Hi, Pilar. Dr. Jennings is a psychoanalyst focused on the clinical applications of Buddhist meditation. She's been working with patients and their families through the Nalanda Institute since 2004. She was awarded her PhD in psychiatry and religion from Union Theological Seminary, and a master's in medical anthropology from Columbia, and a bachelor's in interdisciplinary writing from Barnard College of Columbia University. Dr. Jennings is the author of Mixing Minds, The Power of Relationship in Psychoanalysis and Buddhism, and To Heal a Wounded Heart, The Transformative Power of Buddhism and Psychotherapy in Action. She's currently a researcher at Columbia's Center for the Study of Science and Religion, and co-chair of the Columbia Faculty Seminar on the Memory and Slavery, where she explores the intergenerational transmission of trauma. So welcome to all three of you. And I actually would like to start, Pilar, you've been listening, you've heard the comments from your colleagues first. I want to invite you in just, your just kind of initial reflections and hearing Joe and Dr. Nida, if that's okay to start that broad in general, and then we'll see where we go and meander.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sheryl. Good to be with all of you. Good to be with you, Joe and Dr. Nida. And I have been really enjoying listening to you in your opening remarks. I think I was struck by a few things. Dr. Nida, you touched on transformation and trust. And these feel like such central ingredients to any healing endeavor, especially a psychotherapeutic endeavor, where people come into treatment suffering. It's the only reason why people seek therapy. And longing to do something with the suffering that feels generative. Right? Usually there's a lot of anxiety that the best we can do is somehow understand our suffering and then learn to live with it. This was basically Freud's point, that we should aim for what he called common unhappiness. But in the Tantric vision and Buddhist psychology, as Joe mentioned, there is a beautiful optimism that suggests we can do so much more, right? We can work deeply with our suffering. Try first just to open to it. And this is where we really need the tantric methodology of having a body, that helps us feel safe enough to open to our suffering. And then when the body is feeling a little bit more regulated, a little safer, to begin to use the mind to understand the causes of our suffering, so that slowly, for most of us, it's a slow process, we can begin to work with what we have suffered and then transform it, right? Jung weighed in on this, that we can do something almost alchemical. And in the Buddhist tradition now for few thousand years, we've had methods to help us work deeply with our suffering so that we're actually breaking it down. We're trying to free ourselves from it, not split off from it, not suppress it, not minimize it, but open to it and then transform it so that we're actually able to trust ourselves and others. And I think it's really not until we embark on that process of transforming our suffering that we're able to rely on trust, right? Because otherwise we're going to be necessarily hesitant, vigilant, right? Not trusting others and self, because the suffering is still there. It's hovering, it's oppressive. So, I mean, analysts know it's not until people cultivate other more reliable defenses that they're willing to give up prior defenses. And I think when we bring a tantric sensibility into psychotherapy, then therapists for a while can just know what's involved in transforming suffering, so that people start to live into that experience and then trust their own ability to heal, trust the therapist to participate in that healing process.
Curious, Dr. Nida, your reflections on what Pilar was just sharing and this PTSP notion, if you want to bring that in here for folks who may not have heard of this.
Yeah. I really, loved what Pilar talked. It's very clear, very concise, and very direct. Thank you so much. It sounds very organic too. I think this, we really need to, sometimes to learn how to be organic, organic humans, right? Because, when the way how system and education trained us, we are kind of like processed the food, right? We have been processed. So that's why we are very colorful, we are very shiny, very nice, but then we are really lack of this organic nature. So that's why I said, like when we talk about the traumas, like PTSD, the traumas, the world is filled with collective traumas, right? Like what is going on now and like today in this world, politically, economically, pandemic, it's all kind of like a multiple layered trauma waves, right? And circling our planet, and everybody's traumatized to this and that. So that's why I come out to this, the PTSD instead of PTSD, I used is the PTSP, to use that as a power, so to use the pain, make it like a power, or the suffering to becoming a very powerful tool that we can come over from, the suffering itself. And that also helps us to really to understand others and to empowering others and helping others too. And, when we read the Tibetan, especially Tantric masters, the great masters, the more great master, the more they suffered, right? The more they had pain, the more they suffered, the more they had trauma or tortured or whatever. But they never become the victim of that suffering and pain. And they saw the suffering and the pain as an opportunity. I think that is really, really important. That is really important. So also the belief, when we are said, okay, this, you suffer from anxiety, you suffer from this. Once we are labeled, right? This world is made of labels. Once we are labeled, we believe in that label and we get stuck in that label. So I think that is a kind of like a wrong view, right? Wrong view. Like that's why in the Tantra, like Joe said, I really like that part. Tantra said, we are born with happiness, we live with joy. We are born with joy, we live with joy, and we will die with joy. So that is an unconditional nature of human organic nature, right? Unconditional nature is like that. And then, like Pilar said, Freud said this, the common unhappiness. So then in Tantra, we should say the common joy or the common happiness, So that is a collective. That's why I think, like as Buddha said, the problem is we are not seeing our nature, So we are confused about our nature. The nature, what we believe in, is the conditioned nature. But underneath this conditioned nature, there is an organic nature, which is beyond of conditions, right? I think we need to reconnect with that one. So in the psychology, there's a word that is a dissociative disorder. I really love modern psychology because modern psychology has really good labels and very good names, and most of the labels, they make sense. It's really good, very well analyzed, very well organized, and very well labeled. Dissociative disorder, it's a great expression. But in a way, we have to know, according to Tantric tradition, we all have this problem. And that is the problem. We are all disconnected with ourselves, an original, organic ourselves. And we get lost this, superficial or this external conditioned self. And this conditioned self is like the wave of ocean. It depends on the wind, right? There's a external pressure, there's a family pressure, there's a political pressure, like a wind, and there's a financial pressure. Every pressure, disturbs our mind, and then we really don't know how to deal with this, the waves, and we don't, sometimes the waves are coming like tsunamis, even worse, and sometimes maybe the waves superficially even get frozen. We're in that frozen state, right? So yeah, that's why I thought really we need to have a different way to see things. I think that's the key point. That's why I used the right view. And then, of course, to have that, we need to trust in ourselves. But sometimes we always, we need to trust in ourselves. But trusting in ourselves is not enough. We need to learn how to trust in our friends, in our family members, other people too, right? And I think the trust, it's a very powerful collective, healing energy.
I thank you. What's coming up as I'm listening to you all so far, this transformative power, right? The PTSP, I see in the chat, some people are talking about that and trying to figure out what the acronym is. Post-traumatic, say it. PTSD, post-traumatic stress power. So the transformative potential, of suffering, to be able to actually tap into that and not be frozen or in these fixed patterns or so attached to identity or so attached to a way of being or seeing or thinking. I'd like you all to just sort of talk about what is the level of training that's necessary or for folks to be able to have the capacity to use these methods in the most helpful ways. I'm just curious about, sort of how do folks enter this for whom what you've been talking about so far is just really, really new and not part of their experience.
Can I just share? I think I've really enjoyed. Thank you, Dr. Nida and Pilar, for your speaking clearly to the experience that we have of trying to help others and ourselves in this crazy world. And again, part of the problem, I very much resonate with what Dr. Nida said about the way we're trained in the West, the way we're educated. And as somebody who's sort of been through way too much education and training, you know, especially the medicalization of mental health and well-being, and in the particular form of medicalization in our culture, which is very paternalistic, very patriarchal, very sort of control and dominate. Let's dominate and control and kill off the suffering. It really makes it very hard for people to somehow unlearn all of that and stop getting, you know, I mean, it's not just the people we're working with, people who come into therapy who feel stuck in a label, but I think that the whole system and the very training that therapists, you know, especially psychiatrists and other mental, physician, medically trained people bring to working with people. And so I think that one of the beautiful things for me, having ran into very, very fortuitously run into the Dharma when I was 18, in college, is that all along through my training, I've had this other connection, and it's a connection that felt much more authentic and organic to my sense of what health and sanity and vitality was, and really helped me to sort of, try to evaluate what is really helpful in Western, traditional Western psychiatry, psychology, psychoanalysis, and where there's something fundamentally missing. And I do think that, that's one of the beautiful, possibilities of this kind of a dialogue, is that it's coming at a time when people are understanding that conventional mental health is kind of very limited, to say the least, if not part of the problem in some respects. And we really need to tap into different sources to reconnect to our roots, right? Because I think most healing traditions, we didn't start healing in the 19th century in the laboratories in Europe. Healing's been around for a very long time. And one of the things that one of the inspirations I've taken, Pilar, you mentioned Jung, was in Jung, and one of the main reasons is because he was not afraid of recognizing that our brand or our modern approach to healing is just a cultural form, and that the process has been with all humans, with all indigenous traditions and all other cultural traditions. And we need to sort of, I think, get back to the roots of traditions that haven't been so, I think, distorted by some of the not so healthy dimensions of the Western mindset and culture, the patriarchy, the colonization, the racism, and so on and so forth, things that sort of have driven our culture to be violent. And I think that some of that violence has sort of taken the healing out of our supposedly healing approaches. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I want to invite Pilar in here, and then I'll share a couple comments.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Sheryl. Well, I appreciate you asking about training, because the ideas that we're talking through they're very compelling. And I think we all, I'll just go out on a limb and say that we all have somewhere in the psyche some longing to be well. It's what the psyche pushes for, is liberation, well-being, joy, as Dr. Nida mentioned. And when we suffer, we usually are dealing with incredibly complex conditions, interpersonal conditions, family system conditions, intergenerational conditions, societal biases, shadow content in parents, right, and particular communities. There's so much that contributes to suffering that does require a slow, patient process of getting to know what we're carrying inside us that contributes to suffering. Because I think it's tempting when we're working with methods that promise liberation, perhaps to try to speed through the suffering too quickly. And so the beauty of really appreciating the complexity of our human condition, and that we're situated in bodies, but also in subjectivity, right? Each one of us has suffered in very specific, unique ways. And while those experiences of suffering are also part of categories of suffering, still, we experience them so personally. And so I do think traditionally psychotherapists and analysts have practiced compassion by really slowing down the process of getting to know the nature of that suffering, not trying to get to the relief and the joy and the liberation too quickly. And often people feel such a sense of relief that finally they don't have to minimize the truth of suffering with a therapist. They can speak into it, and then the therapist can actually use their minds and their hearts to help hold what someone has probably been holding on their own. It's just that we don't want to stop there, right? We want to explore, make room for the suffering, take our time with it, and then slowly work with the transformation so that people can genuinely start to feel like life is not just about tolerating suffering. It's also about living meaningfully and joyfully and with connection. And I think that whole endeavor does require pretty substantive training so that we're not overemphasizing the joy and underemphasizing the suffering, or overemphasizing the suffering and underemphasizing the joy.
Thank you. A couple things that I'm thinking about is this, Dr. Nida, you mentioned a bit ago, so great masters had great pain, but not necessarily suffering. And we in this hemisphere, and we'll talk in a little bit about this notion of the West, but we in this hemisphere, this fixation on the term suffering, and it's like this gripping relationship to it. And your comments at the beginning, Dr. Nida, also talked a lot about this different training, sort of fixed versus things change, things are changeable, things don't stay, things happen, they move. I'd just like to see you all have a dialogue about this because it's a very, very different way of thinking. And I'll just offer the other thought that I'm having in here just as a subtext alongside that question. So me, as a Black woman, pansexual, raised in this hemisphere, but not part of dominant cultures, the things that you all are describing about how we're trained and how we are don't apply to a lot of my life. So I just want to problematize that there are whole other sets of experiences about people who were raised in this hemisphere, but who are not dominant culture, that aren't like this sort of rigid, trying to control and manipulate kind of male, heterosexual, white. There's a mind frame that many people in this hemisphere don't have, where there is a great connection to body and feeling and emotion and the sense of the changeability of things. So I just want to offer that up, that the West is not a monolithic experience, and that often gets erased in these dialogues. So as we're talking about, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, I'm an organizational healer. I work with institutional systems on their healing and dysfunction and untangling their knots and organizational Tsalung practices. So just wanted to offer that it's just a different sort of, I'm coming into this like, oh, I hear that experience of dominant culture, but the cultures that I'm a part of, we have a different relationship to suffering, much more like, yeah, sometimes it rains and sometimes it's sunny. We could fixate on to either one of those things, and that would be a problem, but not that it's raining or sunny. So just wanted to open up some dialogue on this notion of transformation as this is how things are, they move and change, versus this fixed mindset, and what really is the problem here. anywhere you want to go with any of those things. I'm all over the map.
I think yeah, you what you said is very interesting. You know, that's what exactly Tantra says. Like we are all individuals, right? So we are all different. We experience, even we are under one government, one system, so we experience differently. So that's why also maybe some people, they focus more on suffering, some people focus more on joy and this and that. So we cannot say everybody have to go this way, because everybody goes and grows in a different way, right? But I think in generally, everybody also need to know the general direction, you know, what is a right to view. Right to view is to how do you call, like as Buddha said in Tibetan, says Rawan Tamchil Dewayin. It says if your freedom is in your hand, that's called happiness. Jawan Tamchil Dungin, it's opposite. If your freedom, if your life is in the hand of somebody else, that's called the suffering, right? That's, I like that Buddha's expression about this. So yeah, in this case, what, you know, I think this to seeing the nature of individuality, I think that is something very, very important. You know, it's not we all have to go slowly, right? Our digestions are different. You know, you know, if we eat vegetables or meat, fish, we digest very fast. But then some people, they have a faster metabolism, they digest fast, and some people, they have difficulties to digest, and some people, they are intolerant, you know, some people, they have allergy. So I think how our mind is learning and reacting, everything is very similar. So therefore, what I can say is, according to Tantra, you know, like my first point, the right to view in general about ourselves, and especially individually, you know, to knowing what is our own nature or what is our own personality. I think that's something very essential. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nida. And thank you, Sheryl, for what you shared. And I can, you know, I think that one of the factors about dominant culture that counters this so much is this sort of attempt to monolithically control ourselves, other systems, and the other capacities that you're describing. Certainly, you know, in terms of some of my family roots and my cultural roots in Southern Italy, like, gave me a very different experience of what was healthy or normal, or what it was like to be a human being. I think that you know, the capacities it's clear that in you know, sort of the dominant culture, from my point of view, including the dominant approaches to healthcare, you know, really try to control and standardize. So how do we cultivate the other capacity, the capacity to really accept diversity, the capacity to accept the transformability and sort of ineffability or ungraspability of everything, these kinds of qualities that Dr. Nida and Pilar are talking about are so important in our own healing or in healing others. It does require a real grounding, preparation, training. It's a lifelong, I think, in a way, I think of it as a kind of resistance, or a kind of you know, cultivation that is kind of swimming upstream in a way. Hopefully, eventually, it won't be swimming upstream. More people will be recognizing that this vital capacity to really be with ourselves, our experience, including suffering and joy, and to be with others in their diversity, and you know, really learning how to work with our own energies in a way that allows us to bring something positive into the world, into our relationships with others. I think, you know, hopefully that will be something that becomes more integral in the training and education, not just of caregivers, but of everybody in you know, around the globe, in different flavors, obviously.
Pilar, what's up for you at this point?
Yeah. Well, first, I was just really appreciating your reminder that everybody is situated differently, and there is no monolithic culture. And it's helpful for me too, because my training, I think it was extremely ecumenical, counterculture. If we're going to think about dominant culture, I was encouraged from the beginning of my training to really challenge the notion of the rarefied consulting office, and that we could be doing psychotherapy in churches and in schools and in baseball fields. I mean, we all have a psyche, right? We all suffer. We all long to feel safer and connected and loved and freed. And so how we're going to embark on healing has to involve creativity. It has to involve risking the novel thought, the novel method, right? We can't default to any too fixed notion of what healing looks like. And in a way, I think that's where personal healing really takes off, is when we get unstuck, right? When we've been traumatized, we tend to get frozen. It's a survival response. Healing methods can also get too frozen. Right? And so part of healing the human family is getting unstuck from particular viewpoints and then getting curious about what healing is going to look like with one human being and one circumstance dealing with one particular form of suffering. Right? So we always have to keep letting the mind be expansive, right? Dynamic. I think it's what helps us grow and change and heal.
Yeah. There's something in the chat that I want to come back to. There's some question. I haven't seen everything, but there's something about, there are questions about view, right view. And I think we need to sort of clarify that, but hold that thought. Because this is the third in a series of conversations, you know, the first had a focus on mindfulness, the second had a focus on compassion, and this one has a focus on embodiment and in particular tantric practices. Would love you all to talk about the relationship between those three things, mindfulness, compassion, and embodiment and tantra. And then we'll go in another direction. And then I'd like to return to this notion of view. And then we may be ready for Q&A. So mindfulness, compassion, and embodied practice is what we've been talking about so far. Connect those for folks who may have joined us for this one or all three conversations.
Okay, I mean, maybe I'll just quickly jump in. You know, I think mindfulness and, you know, clarity, paying attention, being able to notice what's happening, right, is the gateway to, you know, any kind of practice. But with what heart, with what is their warmth, is their benevolence, what's the emotional quality or tone. But when we're talking about embodied practices, and this kind of resonates with what Pilar was saying, we're talking about such a range of different, you know, in a way that, you know, the mind is simple. So it's full of complicated ideas, but it's a pretty simple organism, you know, but the body so multidimensional, and you think about how to tap into the deeper layers of our humanity, or even the subtler layers. And the beautiful thing about Tantra is that it brings in everything, like the art, you know, art, music, chanting, sound, you know, it brings in breathing, movement, sleeping, dreaming, sexual experience. So in a way, it's really saying, hey, look, we're going to try whatever to try to touch into our deeper levels of being. And of course, with that, we need, in a way, mindfulness and compassion are prerequisites, right? In order to be able to open or access the deeper layers of our being, has to be a kind of stillness or clarity of mind. We have to be able to really be present with ourselves and not judging and reacting. And then we also need that warmth to be sure that as we proceed, we can hold, and we can help sort of hold the hurt and bring something, you know, soothing or calming to it. But when we have those preliminaries, then we can really start to access the creative potential of our, if you will, from the Western point of view, our unconscious, right? Or or the deeper layers of the brain, if you will, from a neuro point of view. And for that, we need to different, the limbic system in the early brain or the unconscious, they don't speak in words. They speak other languages. And all of these interventions, including, not just individual things you do in an office, but things like, theater or chanting with people, or, having different kinds of rituals that bring communities together. All of these things are possible ways in to those deeper layers. And they've been systematically kicked. This is one of the reasons why Freud broke with Jung and others, is that he didn't want all this richness, especially anything that smelled of spirituality or, to come in. So psychotherapy has been impoverished and sort of cut itself off from its roots. And I think the encounter with Tantra is a real opportunity to re-enrich and to sort of open that horizon of the curiosity to whatever might be healing that Pilar is talking about.
Dr. Nida, this mindfulness, compassion in Tantra.
I think, compassion is the foundation of everything, right? As I said, we need to trust each other, trusting in ourselves. So that is a reaction of the compassion, right? Actually, when there is a compassion, it brings us all together, it's connecting. And then that also becoming the foundation of the trusting. So I think it's something very, very essential, So for example, I met an Italian doctor here. She's a very, very experienced MD doctor. And so she said, "Oh, you're from Tibet, you do yoga. What else do you do?" I said, "Oh, I talk about compassion." She looked at me, she said, "Oh, I'm not religious." I said, "Well, compassion is not something religious, but in her kind of education, she think, oh, if you talk about compassion, you are something religious or spiritual, this and that." But then we had some conversations, but at the end, she liked about that. She said, "Oh, can you talk more about this and that?" And then she tried to tell me more about her personal stories, this and that. I think also there are kind of, some people are so scared of using the words of, they are again being labeled of religious or this and that, As I said, the human organic nature, and one of our human organic nature is the love and compassion, right? There's no doubt about this, because of this, we are still exist. And then the mindfulness is, I think it's about awareness, about awareness. And especially, I think in the psychology or in psychotherapy, the most important part of mindfulness is that this prevents us or protect us, that we don't get lost in our thoughts, in our ideas, right? Like the delusional symptoms, delusional symptom is a false belief. So, or like paranoia, we have many paranoid thoughts. And some people, they are so convinced their paranoid thoughts are a reality, right? And the reality, so like kind of, actually it's a kind of distraction too, that kind of distraction is the opposite of the mindfulness, right? So that's why I think in our mental healing, the mindfulness is really, really important. And also so many people, when they start to have the anxiety disorders, anxious, and they think and think and think, and then at the end they get lost in the thoughts. And all these imaginations, non-real, this and that, everything's becoming so real. And then they start to have fear and worry and this and that. Actually, if we are a little bit of mindful in these things, I think really the mindfulness is a big, like a protection, big protection and big prevention too. So yeah, that's why when I talked about the right view, I think maybe we need to work more on education in these things, And also the tantric, some practices, if we do little by little every day, it helps us to understand. And mindfulness, also the same thing. Of course, there are many different kinds of mindfulness, but I think the most important mindfulness is to have awareness with our own thoughts and feelings and emotions. I think that is very, very powerful.
Great, thank you. Pilar, anything you wanted to contribute to this continuum.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it occurred to me as I was listening to Dr. Nida that there's this notion in polyvagal theory that state precedes story. Right? So the body has its experience before the mind comes online to narrate that experience. It's just that so often what's happening in the body, and Joe mentioned, our bodies are really very complex. It happens outside of awareness. We just get gripped by what's happening somatically. So when there's some practice of awareness that's there to know, to respond, to bear witness to our somatic experience, then we have a much better chance of being able to first appreciate something has happened that's affected our bodies. And it doesn't take much. We're pretty sensitive creatures. Somebody looks at us funny, the nervous system is engaged. I pressed the start webinar button prematurely this morning. Right? Nervous system response. So if there's a mindfulness practice there, just to notice, okay, the body is having a reaction, then it does usually give us more choice about how to respond and what to do with that activation. And then again, as Dr. Nida pointed out, if the compassion is there in a genuine way, holding that whole process, then what we can do with the awareness is more likely to be helpful, healing, right? Just to notice we're going through something that might be challenging, and can we meet that challenge with some tenderness, some respect, some curiosity.
Could I add one thing?
Sure.
Just in terms of the conversation between Dharma, between Buddhist tradition and Western psychotherapy, think of psychoanalysis as really being a form of mindfulness training. A number of people talk about this. Like, we're letting go of the reason, the normal narrative, and we're just trying to accept what arises. And of course, that's practiced in the context, of a deep healing connection where there's the presence of empathy and compassion in the room that we can maybe borrow from the therapist and start to apply to ourselves. So, those preliminaries are there. And that's one of the reasons, in a way, I in terms of the positive contribution of psychotherapy in our culture, there's a way in which psychotherapy is a countercultural institution. It's trying to provide a space for mindfulness and compassion in a very stress-driven, violent life and world, or at least for some people. But I think this new dimension of then really going deeper, leaning deeper into what may be normally unconscious or normally happening in the body that we're not really attuned, or we can't speak to because we're not using the language of that part of our system. We're not, our autonomic nerve, our polyvagal, our autonomic nervous system, listens to the language of it as movement and breath. It's not words. But if we learn that language, then we can speak to that part of our body, and we can start to hold it with awareness and work with it. So I think that this approach is adding, but within a lot to Western understandings, at least mainstream therapy understandings, a lot of different potential ways into the deeper mind. But it's very much resonant within the context of what therapy is trying to do. It's just allowing it to kind of go a lot deeper.
Thank you. So let's shift now to talking about social dimensions, right? Social healing. So we've been very kind of mostly individually focused. Let's actually really shift to how these practices and approaches and the whole focus of today's dialogue, what's the relationship between these approaches and social collective healing and well-being?
it's a
Well,
question for
yeah,
us.
please, Dr. Nida.
Sorry, please. You go ahead.
Well, maybe just to start us off, thank you, Sheryl. I think there is real resonance between a Mahayana perspective, right? That everything we do in our spiritual practice it's for all beings, and it's radically indiscriminate. We really understand that we're not doing this just for our own well-being or for our family's well-being or our group, but for all beings. So there really is the sense that the human family needs to be cared for in our practice. And in my clinical training, there was a similar notion that all of our personal struggles are just an inroad to the collective. I mean, that's basically Jung's view and his contribution to healing, that we can use our personal both struggles and efforts at healing and success at healing, and really use that for the greater good, and understand that we're tasting something that larger groups, communities are touched by. And often it helps people start to cull meaning from personal suffering when they really understand that personal suffering is intimately linked to collective suffering. Also, personal well-being, right? Success or efforts at liberation that are working are connected to the greater good and group experience of liberation. Then we really start to trust that what we're going through matters. It's not for oneself alone. There are ripple effects. And it's just that most of us need reminders again and again that we are embedded. We are completely embedded in groups. And I would say in the psychoanalytic tradition more recently, maybe in the last 40, 50 years, the intersubjective folks and the relational folks were trying to help us understand that there's just no such thing as a decontextualized client or patient, right? And Winnicott had a similar idea, no such thing as an infant, only a nursing couple. We carry relationship within, we are co-creating others in terms of how we navigate life. And so I think both Buddhist psychology and especially Tantric perspectives and contemporary psychotherapy appreciate our personal healing is intimately linked with group healing.
Dr. Nida, were you going to offer something here?
So when we meditate ourselves as a Buddha or deity, so first is self-transformation, and then we call it the mandala, transforming the surroundings, becoming the mandala. And then you have to send your light and energy, transforming everybody else also into the deities and Buddhas, So in that case, we cannot say only I'm the Buddha or deity, I'm manifesting something like perfect, divine, and, different from others, right? We send that energy equally to everyone. And so then, of course, I think that's why equanimity is very important. But equanimity, we are not saying, we are not saying everybody is completely equal, right? I think this equanimity means we have equal values. Maybe our values are different. Somebody's value is doing good things, but then some others' value is creating troubles, right? And making troubles, actually, it is a value too, because somebody creates problems in a community, in a group, in the village, and then so we have to challenge that. We have to find a solution for that, because of that problems, because of the conflict, and that can refine, our reconnection or the relationship and so on. So I think the problems and pain and suffering should not define us, it should refine us. So that's why when we talk about the groups and the community. So for me, the way to think these things are very easy, because when I grew up in the yurts, there are 5 or 6 different families. Everybody's living in the yurt. So actually every family has had one yurt, and that's our home. But then all others, the neighbors, are also your home, right? Also, that's why I think also this actually it happens through taking care of each other. Taking care of each other is, based on compassion and the trust, right? So, somebody, if I don't go back to my yurt, my home, I don't find any food. I enter my neighbor's house, I find something. If there's something, I eat. So nobody calls me a thief, right? Because they know a little boy is hungry and need to eat like this. So actually, in that case, all the neighbors for us is like our different houses and our different homes, right? So the similar way, I also saw this in Bhutan. Actually, it's a very great example. For example, the families, the whole village is coming together. They help each other to build a new house, right? So, every 20 years, a new family, they tear down the old house and to build a new house. It's a beautiful, wonderful new house. So it means equally every family, they get a house and they don't need to pay much, because everybody's coming together and helping, So I think that is a really like organic human nature, So of course we can use lots of theories and ideas and this and that. And also we have to accept that the best ideas normally doesn't work in a practical way, right? So that's why all politicians are struggling, all beautiful theories and philosophy doesn't work, because our human connection, it's so different, so many things. So, but I think the most important is to really, seeing everybody's value in a different way. And everyone has a talent, everyone has a power and value in a different way. And then once we put together, and then so our group or our community grows in a different way, right? Of course, then the harmony and to maintaining the peace is very important. But I think all these things, it comes when there is a trust.
Yeah, thank you.
Joe will offer a comment, and then I'll share something, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
Yeah, I loved what Pilar and Dr. Nida shared, and going back to the issue of the view, I think one of the things about Tantra that inspires me is this understanding that our body isn't just this physical thing, and it's not just a bunch of nerves and chemicals. The extremely subtle body is sort of like a quantum field of awareness, right? There's a way in which we're not just embedded, we are totally instantaneously co-creating each other, right? So, and Dr. Nida's story expresses that energy, that awareness of the total interconnectedness or mutuality of all forms of life in a very particular cultural form or familial form, where people are living in that spirit. That's the compassionate spirit, right? At the sort of, we're made of that from the Tantric point of view, the Mahayana point of view. We're made of the energy of blissfully open compassion. That's what we really are. That's our body. And so naturally, if one of us tunes in a little bit more to that at any moment, it strengthens that force everywhere, and it resonates. And so the understanding, in my view, of what the Tantras, the approach is that, in a way we need a community to be in a certain place in order for us to be in a certain place internally. It's not just that we help the society become a little better when we tune into our energy. It's like we also need to be in a certain kind of a field. And so there's this interdependence between the individual awakening and the awakening of those around, or the community around, or the culture around. It's a whole, it's village endeavor. So in a way, we can't really go much further, because we're connected in the sort of in this deeper fabric of our being to what people are with. So we all rise together, as Martin Luther King said, our destinies are, you know, totally interdependent and interwoven. I'll just say one thing about the world of psychotherapy, and Pilar beautifully, and yes, you really have been educated in the counterculture of psychotherapy, Pilar, and thank goodness. You know, the understanding, like this kind of lack of awareness of the importance of community and group is expressed in sort of lack of therapeutic groups or therapeutic communities, in the lack of the understanding or the art for how to build healing community is a really key factor. Even if you have a wonderful individual relationship, you go out into a world where there's no community, or there's a sort of harmful or oppressive community. And so one of the things that, in terms of mental health, is that we need to be thinking more about how to build healing communities on all levels, you know, in our homes, in our you know, organizations, in our neighborhoods, and so on. And that, I think, should be a proper part of you know, what therapy starts to, what's the culture of psychotherapy starts to stretch into.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll offer one thought here, a couple thoughts here, and then invite the Q&A. We've got kind folks, Roshana Green, also from the Nalanda faculty, to help us field some of those questions. Just a couple comments here to bring in. I love the points that you ended on, Joe, around this notion of building healing communities. There's much happening depending on which communities you're connected to. In this country and in others, there's a field of healing justice that folks talk about. Many things happening, you know, like our wellness and our well-being, as folks have mentioned, are connected to one another. This notion of this felt sense of interconnectedness, and folks are moving and cultivating joint healing, not just my own individual well-being, but us. I'll just share from my own practice and experience with these practices and methods all along the yanas. There's this greater felt sense of awareness, this greater felt sense of interconnectedness, right? Like there's this willingness, but also sensitivity, not just to what's happening with me, but what's happening with other people. And it almost becomes unavoidable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like this unavoidable, one of my teachers says, willingness to be touched, willingness to be affected by what is happening around me. And in that, there's this sort of inevitable being compelled to be of service. You can't help yourself. You can't help but want to be of support, because other people's suffering actually becomes painful, not just mine, but that of other folks. So, you know, and over time we can learn to become more skillful with that, as opposed to clumsy and all kinds of dramatic, inappropriate things that we may do at times. So I'll pause there, and Roshana, invite you on to help us with a few questions. I see that the chat and the Q&A have been active, but have no idea what's going on over there. We've got a few minutes.
Hello. It's been very active, and it's been active in a way that folks are so appreciative of this conversation. So thank you to all. Lots of thank yous, lots of appreciation of a conversation. I'm noticing a theme. This has arisen in a variety of ways and across questions, and it's around how. Folks really want to know how. You know, how is it that they can access some of this wisdom and this skillfulness you're referring to bring to their work with their clients? Like, are there tantric practices that are accessible for them to start to incorporate? People just want to know how and where to start. You know, how can they learn how to do this? So I think that's for anyone.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna see if Dr. Nida would love to address this. And I think it connects back to this notion that I was asking about earlier around training. So it's one thing to learn practices and use them for ourselves. It's an entire different thing to learn practices and be capable of appropriately supporting others in that. So that's just one thought. But Dr. Nida, curious about, people wanting to know what do I do next? Where do I start? And some folks may be actual clinicians, therapists, healers, and other people may be asking for their own well-being.
Yeah, I think they should start to join the Nalanda Institute. So yeah.
You got your plug.
Yeah, he's actively training and in a very wonderful way. So I really appreciate his great contribution. And I think I just can give just one, tip. And this tip is, if in a tantric way, if we help others, I think we need to learn what empowerment means, the empowerment. To empower people to believe more in the good or joy things than rather they get stuck with the problems and negativity things, So that's why, for example, it's a very common, there's a very common Tibetan expression. It says, you help 99, you help 100 people. You are able to help 99 people, so they all appreciate, you are happy. But one person is complaining about you and couldn't help, and you harmed this and that, right? So in this case, which one is the most hurting one? So our mind gets stuck with this one, right? And then we forget the 99 people. So, it's not a logical balance, but our mind automatically goes in this negative part, right? Yes, it's true. You have a relationship problems, right? Yes, you lost your job, but you didn't lose your life, human life. You are still alive. You are still young. You are still smart. You are still talented. Do you understand? So there's no really like comparison what we have and what we lost, right? So at end, like in the Tibetan Buddhism, we talk about precious human life, precious human life. And this is the most precious thing, this is the most precious things what we can ever have in this world, in this planet, right? In this life. But if we are able to really empower that part and to value our own life, empowering that part, I think it's already really, in a way, we can help ourselves and others to move forward in a better direction. So that's why if I just give one word from Tantric view, is about empowerment.
Joe, if you wanted to say just a tiny bit on this notion of how you got the plug for Nalanda, there may be other ways, but I'd like, if we can get one or two more questions and before we end, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what all three of us are engaged in, in training people who are caregivers in different ways, and it is important to get, to find communities that you can join. And in the Contemplative Psychotherapy program at Nalanda, we have a year training in mindfulness, a year in compassion, and a year in embodiment, where we go into these practices, where Dr. Nida is a core faculty, and so is Sheryl, and so is Pilar. So I think there's so many ways, and I love what Dr. Nida said about recognizing that you can. That this is the first thing, the message that it's possible to access our healing capacity to a much greater degree. And then look around, there's a million things happening in our world where we can sort of take steps and try things.
Yeah. And also, if someone hasn't already, if you could also put the Soa Rigpa Institute's website in the chat. There's so many resources and trainings, from workshops to longer multi-year approaches, multi-hour to multi-year. So depending on your interest and whether you want to do the sort of medical counselor and then specifically religious spiritual training, all of those, the full gamut is offered. Thank you. Someone put it in the chat.
Yeah,
so Rashana,
Pilar's also running a program through Barry. Barry
thank you.
Studies,
Please put that in the chat too.
Working with therapists on integrating the Dharma. So
Great. Roshana, do we have time for at least one more?
One more that I think is worth, we discussed this on some level, but I think it's worth making sure folks feel clear about Dr. Nida's concept of PTSP and how that interacts with and takes into account things such as structural racism, social inequities. And it was directed towards Dr. Nida, but anyone that would want to speak to that, how we can transmute, trauma and turn it into a power. Folks were just trying to make sure we weren't bypassing some of these things. And anyone who would like to speak to that.
I think, that's a very good question. So I think one thing is we need to know like our level, our condition. So I cannot say all traumatized people can do that, right? So, for example, when there's an earthquake, only 20% of people, they really get traumatized, but 80% they don't, right? So that's why, we talk about typology. So our typologies are different. Some people are more vulnerable to trauma, some people are less, this and that. But then also depends on the level of the traumas, right? Level of the traumas. Sometimes the trauma is too strong. Of course, we cannot turn it into a power. It's almost like a joke, But the thing, what I really believe is, I think it should become a part of education, because if we are trained when we are little, I think that part is very important. In our childhood, if we are trained this kind of ideas and education, if we receive how to react, when you are bullied, right? When you are attacked, when you are this and that. And also we cannot say, okay, you have to only protect yourself, or if somebody bully you, you bully back, or you fight and this and that. I think we can train the young kids in a very different way. And I know we don't have much time, but just a very short example, like one of my little boy, he's in Italy, there are not so many Asians, and I'm always worried, somebody will bully him. And then one day he come home and he's a little bit angry. He said, okay, somebody told him something, something nasty, he's angry. So I said, look, somebody told you something because of their confusions and this and that. I said, you should not, take it too much personal. But then I said, what you want for that person? He said, I'm very angry. I want that person suffers. And I said, now you look, are you suffering or that person is suffering? He said, yeah, now I'm suffering because I'm angry. I said, look, then you want, somebody else suffers, but you are suffering by yourself. I said, this is kind of stupid. If that person tell you stupid, he's right, because you make yourself suffering and you can't, you don't know how to handle this anger. He said, oh yeah, that's true. Right. So for example, for me, this is a kind of how I introduce Buddhism to my kids, from their young age. And then actually he understood that part very well. And then that helped him how to deal with, bullies and traumas, this and that. So that's why I think we can learn like a step by step, and we practice these little things and this, and then we really can reach that level that we can prevent first, if it's possible. Prevention is the best. But if we can't prevent and still we can use that as a power. But then, of course, it depends on the how do you say, degree of the traumas, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I just say, I think it's vital that I do what I said before about how important it is to have a certain kind of supportive community in order for it to access this kind of power. So one of the things we can do, and it's one of the things I think all of us are trying to do, Dr. Nida with Soa Rigpa, Pilar with her activities through Barry and elsewhere, and Nalanda, to create communities where there is a kind of holding compassion and a sense of safety, where people can begin to feel that they can access awareness and some capacity to transform. And so I think it does require and multiple countercultural communities of resistance to violence and structural racism and other kind of dominant cultural forces in order for this to actually get off the ground for most of us, I think.
Yep. I know we're ending and we're about a minute over. Thank you all.
Yeah, about this, about this racist, I hear this a lot from, from the West. In China, we don't hear this. I grew up in Tibet, and my half family is Tibetan and half is Mongolian. So we are kind of bullied by maybe Mongolians. They're saying you're not pure Mongolians. Tibetans, they're saying you're not pure Tibetans. And then plus the Chinese, minorities are this and that. So I actually really experienced how much this is affecting really like psychologically and, this racist and this and that. But even you experience so much this, I try to think and understand like how much affected this and that. But at the end, I think something because of the childhood education, not taking too much personally. If other people are bullying you, also you see they did it because of their confusion, because of their ignorance, because of their stupidity and this and that. I think this kind of understanding is really, really kind of, how do you say, really helping and supporting internally, Sorry, I just want to say that, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all. Just one last comment on that. I appreciated Dr. Nida's comments around there are different levels of trauma, different depths of trauma, and at any different moment, we may have different capacity for engaging that. At different times of our life, we may have different capacity where we're not internalizing that trauma. We can have an experience that can be extremely intense and it doesn't pattern us. This is the thing. For folks who've been oppressed, this is what our training becomes. How can I have greater and greater intensity and experiences, especially those of us who are in the profession of doing social transformation? How can I engage really intense, societal, large traumatic experiences and not have them pattern who I am, how I'm experiencing reality, and that compressing my ability to be loving and kind and generous? This is what you end up training in. So thank you all.
Thank you.
I think we're done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheryl. Thanks, Dr.
Thank
Nida.
you. Did you have some final comments, Joe, about what's coming from now on that you wanted to announce?
I think people will hear about
Okay, thank you.
our introduction to contemplative psychotherapy class, which will sort of have three classes coming up in April to touch on these three forms of healing. And so please stay tuned and join us then.
I'll be at one of them.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Appreciate everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn and Tricycle.
Thank you, Tricycle.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you,
Nalanda. Thank you, Rashana.